but there was a very specific fear-based trauma response that you observed for me. And you asked my permission to tell the story because it could be embarrassing. But I think it's a good example to what those walking with trauma survivors should be looking for. Tell us what that was. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Wednesdays with Watson. If you've been following my journey, by now you know that my name is Amy Watson, and I am your host. It is hard to believe, but we are almost at the end of the first season of Wednesdays with Watson, the season we called PTSD, Jesus and Me. It has been an amazing journey with healing for myself and others, and has initiated conversations that I never thought possible. Today, I wanted to bring back special guest Crissy Loughridge. I wanted to bring her on today because we're going to discuss facing fears. And if there's ever been a time in history with most, if not all, of humankind is feeling fearful about something, it is during this pandemic of 2020. In the context of our podcast season, I wanted to bring Crissy back to help me remember some of my own fearful reactions to this season that we all find ourselves walking. I want to do that because many of you have expressed how helpful perspective is, as some of you love patients with PTSD, anxiety, depression. Some of you minister to us, and some of you are us. So I thought bringing back my memory keeper would be advantageous. But I also wanted her to bring her back because I wanted her to share her experience with fear during this season and how each of us are uniquely built, and we're going to respond to that fear in different ways. We are recording this episode freestyle on the Sunday before the United States election, and this episode will drop the day after the U.S. election. And so on this Sunday, we thought it appropriate to address fear, how to identify it, and how to calm it. So I'd like to drop into this conversation with Crissy. As you will see, healing is continuing for all of us. And so let's have this all-important conversation about facing fears. Because fears live in dark corners, but they lose their power when we call it out. And that's exactly what we plan on doing today. We all have to face these fears at some point. We may as well help each other do it. So without further ado, welcome, Crissy. Thanks for doing this. You add so much to the mission, and I'm truly grateful since I know this is completely outside of your comfort zone, to say the very least, so thank you.
I'm happy to be back. Thanks for having me.
You're quite the popular guest with your soothing voice, as so many say, but let's just jump right into this. I wanted to spend some time talking about fear. But before we talk about fear, so oftentimes it is thought of in a negative context. I do think it is important for us to open the subject and remember that fear is actually a gift from our intelligent designer. It helps us when we know that we need to respond to danger. Do you agree that fear can be our friend?
Yes, and I think that we are often looking at it as this negative, ooh, you're so fearful. And yet as a 6 on the Enneagram, I am also very aware of my surroundings person.
Sure.
So I'm aware of the dangers around me, and therefore a lot of people would misconstrue that as I'm a worrier. I'm not worried. I'm aware.
And prepared.
And I have at least 6 exit strategies in every situation. I don't find that to be a burden. I find that to be empowering. And so I don't feel fearful. I'm not looking for the exits because I'm scared. I just like to be prepared.
So fear for a 6 is, like you said, is like your friend in a way. It's
is
very natural for you in some ways.
Right. And so I don't see, that's not how I view fear. Fear for me is when those decisions I become paralyzed and I can't move forward. Then that is fear, and that is harmful fear.
And so I think it's important as we talk about fear, that it's not just a negative thing. Now, we're going to be talking about a little bit in the way of I don't even want to put that word negative to it, but it's not always in that context. But I do think it's important, regardless of what your personality type is, that we understand that fear is a God-given response to our environment. Some people are better at responding to that than others, and the Enneagram 6 is a very good example of that. But in the context of today, I also wanted to talk about what I call the fear loop. And that is more for not only my personality type as the Enneagram 2, but just as a PTSD patient. But many times when you get on that fear loop, you can't get out of a fight or flight. And so many people don't know that their bodies and minds are fighting. The fact of the matter is, Crissy, is that every single person on this planet right now is being touched by this in one way or the other, right? Yes. You're in one of a couple different sectors. You're either currently fearful, you're learning how to address your fears, or you're denying your fears. And in some people, there have been some delayed fears. And I think that we'll talk about that in a minute with you for sure. But this is a scary time. And we're all going to respond differently, just like you just said, in our uniqueness and our experiences also cloud, obviously, right? And so that's where PTSD comes in. But I do want to talk a little bit more about personality. You jumped into that Enneagram 6 before I thought you were going to. But so we both took the Enneagram, and man, has it just been empowering. And so as an Enneagram 6, which is the loyalist, what is, though, your core fear? And I hate to use that word in the context of, but that's what the Enneagram calls it. What is the core need, I should say?
My core need is security. And so this shook my core need. The pandemic, there's no security job-wise, health-wise, everything is shaken up, including the social unrest that's shaken up everything as well. So security for me has gone to zero.
Yeah.
However, more important for me, and this may be why we are the loyalist, is that my people, my clan, have to be safe.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. More important. So my immediate response is to calm down, make sure everybody else is safe. And so the first couple months of the pandemic, everybody's saying they're struggling, and I'm great.
Yeah.
Because I am 100% in I can solve this mode, I'll help everyone else mode. And I knew, because I've done this several times with major traumatic events, I even joked about it. I'll struggle with this in 6 months. And sure enough, we're there. And I am really, really struggling now when everyone else is starting to kind of get back to normal as best we all can. And so now's my turn to struggle. And so I wanted to speak up on this podcast in case there are other me's out there, other people like me who are just now struggling and going, what happened? Heck? Yeah, I was fine. And it does seem so strange to be struggling now. And I mean, if there's a car accident, anything major, I am the one who is fine afterwards. Fine. And about 6 months later, it all hits me.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I'm alone in that. And if you are like me, give yourself a break.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Recognize that it is a personality type, and it's okay. It's okay to struggle. Right. And to find the Lord in that.
And we are so colored too by not only our personalities, but by our experiences. And so the fact that you shared that with us helps people out there who are just now waking up going, wait, what just happened? And the rest of the world is like, it's been going on since March. What you just did was help them feel those things that we so often want, is that seen, known, heard, loved, valued. And as community members of our circle of influence, it's important that we know our people and that we walk through it in ways that make sense for them. Like, for example, for me to help you walk through this season is for me to keep reminding you that you've been through some stuff before and you've been okay before. One of the things that is helpful for me to do is listen to you flesh out the worst case scenarios, and often laughing about them. But I know that this safety is a core issue for you. And as your friend, it's my job to just to try to continue to remind you of the faithfulness of God. And you know what, Crissy? I also want to remind you and everybody listening that you survived 100% of the bad days already. And so here's the other thing, and maybe you can speak to this just for a second, but sometimes, and this is true with you, sometimes fear looks like anger. And I want to speak to that for a second because I think it's true for a lot of people. And so if you're walking alongside with somebody that fear looks like anger, that may be confusing to you. It took me a while to realize that fear sometimes looks like anger. Why do you think that is?
Things that we can't control, we tend to be afraid of.
Yeah.
And when things get out of control, our emotions go typically one way or another, just like there's either fight or flight.
Right.
I think there's either anger or sadness. And for a lot of us, I think the fight, anger comes out. And so I know with me, a lot of times when you get sick, it comes out as anger from me. And usually it's not anger at you. It's anger at we need to get to the doctor. We need to get there now. And so if we're not moving at the pace I need us to, then my brain starts looping on, oh my God, if we don't get help now, it's all going to go south. And so that anger is more of just all the emotions coming out, and you don't have a place for them to all go.
Right, so they come out.
They explode.
It took me a while to figure that out with you, but it is important, as those of you out there who are listening, and whether it's you or somebody that you're walking with, is that as we walk with people during this time of fear, that you have to find what works for them. And so for me, when I realized that came out, that your fears come out in anger, and so that was one of two reasons why I wanted you on this podcast, was to speak from your perspective, not necessarily a PTSD patient or a trauma survivor, even though we've all walked through things. I wanted people to know, and I think that was your heart too, that it so much depends on the personality type. Well, the second reason I wanted you back is because I need my memory keeper. I think if someone were to ask me if I was a fearful person, I would answer no. And for the most part, that's true. But just like we just mentioned, fear doesn't look the same for everybody. And I know that it looks different for me, and I know that it looks different for other trauma survivors. You've watched that play out for me in the early days of this pandemic and really all the way through it. So I wanted to speak to you about this. And so I want to dive into it and see if we can unpack what it means to face fear from a PTSD perspective, understanding that really fear has kept us alive. But it's also important to help those who love PTSD understand that we don't always know when we're afraid. And so first I want to describe fear as we both see it in a word picture. So, for example, when I think of the word fear, I think of snakes and bridges. When you hear the word fear, what do you think?
I think of a black hole, because I don't like the unknown. See, I have a plan for snakes and bridges and alligators and all those things, but a black hole, it's the unknown. I can't fight that.
Wow, that's good. So, and of course, I'm thinking the only way I can explain it is the way snakes and alligators and bridges makes me feel, right? Like, so for me, those things make me feel like that feeling that like you just got in a car accident. But not all fear that I have feels like that. Not all of it is like these blinking lights, like, hey, you're afraid, So not all of it is a black hole, Sometimes we're fearful about things and we don't even know it. And so let's talk about that. Clearly, you and I have both walked through some stuff together. We limped into this season anyway with a massive shared sorrow. You began, as that weekend unfolded and we were watching on the news, just things happen. You began to identify some fearful reactions for me very early on. We don't have time to talk about all of them, but you and I own a business together. And on March 17th, I had to make 12 of the most difficult phone calls I've ever made in my entire life, furloughing our entire team. The days after that are a blur for me. But there was a very specific fear-based trauma response that you observed for me. And you asked my permission to tell the story because it could be embarrassing. But I think it's a good example to what those walking with trauma survivors should be looking for. Tell us what that was.
So as everything was unfolding, I was planning. Of course, that's my personality. So I'm already going, okay, here's what we'll do, and we'll change this, and we'll adjust this. And meanwhile, Amy's on her computer, and I just see her typing away, and she said, I just filed for unemployment. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. You can't. You're an owner. It doesn't work that way. And the whole time I'm thinking this just isn't going to work. Normally that would have been a fight for us. I would have, gone through 185 reasons why you can't do that. But I just let it happen, knowing that in some ways I think you needed control of something. It did sort of blow up.
Oh, yes. I'm still trying to undo
it.
Yes.
But that was the beginning of a whole lot of reactions for you. And for me, the best way to describe it is a pendulum. And you would swing from really being, okay, we're okay. This is okay. I can see the Lord is doing something with this. And so, yes, we just lost our business, but I see the Lord at work. And the next day it would be, I've lost my career. 26 years, it's down the tubes. It's all over. I can't do this anymore. Oh my gosh. And so we would fly back and forth between those two things. And there was never that middle ground where the pendulum would just be in the middle of both the Lord is at work and
it's going to be okay.
And it's going to be okay. And this is sad. Both things were true, but the violent swings was concerning for me. And then I noticed the loop of if something went wrong, you couldn't stop the thought. Or if you saw something on the news that upset you, you'd talk about it all day and not be able to just calm down from it and say, that news is upsetting that I saw on TV. But you couldn't say that and move on. It would be, we'd talk about it all day and we continued to unpack it, but it wasn't getting better. And that's when I started to think, well, this isn't getting better for Amy. There were definite moments where you were fine, but when we'd hit those loops, I was concerned for you. And that was when I thought we might need some additional help.
Yeah, and so I look back on that now, and I remember that was the first time in my life I didn't even know how to apply for unemployment. Somehow I figured it out, though,
I still don't know. I don't even know what website you went to.
Yeah, but it was illogical, and I want people out there, you asked me, I don't want to out you for something so silly because you didn't call it dumb because you wouldn't do that. But looking at it now, even now for me, it seems like such an asinine thing to do. But all I saw was, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to eat. I'm not going to be able to keep my power on. I think it's only $275 a week, but let me do it. And so it was we speak a lot, and for those of you who have listened to many episodes of this podcast, we talk a lot about the trauma loop and how EMDR helps, and how the right side of your brain is emotional and the left side is logical, and my two sides weren't talking to each other. So we began to have a very serious conversation that was actually initiated by one of my doctors, the recommendation to go on some medication, which I've not been on for many, many years. Talk to us about that decision, because it felt like that, even thinking about that felt like a failure to me. I thought, you know what, I'm on a podcast every 2 weeks. People are watching me heal. I'm healing. I'm okay. This is crazy. Why are we even having this conversation about medicine? Talk from your perspective what that decision was like, because that did involve you in it quite heavily, actually.
Yeah, it is interesting because in so many ways you were and are doing so much better, but it was those loops that caused me to think possibly some additional help would help you. And so when you came to me and said that the psychiatrist had recommended a medicine, I knew that it was going to be a struggle to get you to even maybe consider taking it. But as we discussed it, it was, maybe we could cut the pill in half, maybe in quarters.
Well, I made the mistake by Googling the medicine.
It really wouldn't have mattered. I think that the bigger thing for you was, why should I have to take this?
Because I've done all this work. And
you've done all this work,
office.
And you are, and honestly, to see where you were 10, 12 years ago to how you are today, you almost want to be like, are you kidding me? I don't need medicine now. Now right. I'm great. Thanks.
Comparatively speaking,
I know.
For sure.
Thanks for giving me this now. Yeah. But it was one of those, I could see the loops were torturing you.
Yeah.
And anything to stop that was worth it to me. Because again, the rest of the time you were doing so well that the torture you were going through with the loops, it was just, it was worth fighting for. And so we did. We discussed. We went to Dr. Pettit. Yeah. We discussed some more. You thought about it some more and prayed about it and finally
took
it.
Yeah. And so for those of you listening, the PTSD patients listening, you know what she's talking about. The loop was something like, oh my God, my 26-year career is gone. Oh my God, I'm almost 50. I'm not going to be able to find a job. Oh my God, I'm not going to eat. And I would literally open my refrigerator and think, okay, I have like 14 days more worth of food. And those thoughts would not go away. And so, yes, I went on medicine and it has calmed everything down. And so thank you for answering that, because if you're out there and you have PTSD, anxiety, depression, or any of its friends or cousins, you probably are struggling extra hard right now, even though, as our pastor says, we're closer to the end than we've ever been. But I think that we have some interesting days in front of us. I always want to have a why to every podcast, and the purpose of this one is certainly to help people face fear. I think we've made it pretty clear how everybody does that differently. My own experience has proven to me that fear is perhaps exaggerated with mental illness, and so I do want to encourage people out there, as I already have. I know this is the second time I've said that, but if you need extra help during this time, it's not something to be ashamed of, and I am so glad that I did it. But this is a hard time for people without trauma. And Crissy, as you were telling me the story about my responses to all of this uncertainty and the sadness, I wanted to leave the people with what's getting both of us through it. I don't know what's getting you through it. I don't know your answer to that, but I could tell you what's getting me through it. And it is the promise of his presence. Because he has never, ever fallen down on that promise to never leave me or forsake me. I love Isaiah 43. Israel, my Old Testament friend, had been through so much by the time we got to Isaiah 43, and they were going through so much, and they were going to go through more. You see, we think as Americans we're the only country that has ever been through anything difficult. Well, Israel didn't even become a country until 1968. So they were going through some stuff, and this is what was written to them from God. And so as I talk about what has gotten me through this pandemic, it is the promise of his presence in Isaiah 43. This passage of scripture is about, like I said, the restoration of Israel, and so the promises had to be so precious to them. But this is what God said to them, and this is the promise that I'm holding on to, because he has never, ever left me on this one. Do not fear, Amy. Do not fear, listener. For I have redeemed you and called you by name. You are mine. I will be with you when you pass through the waters and when you pass through the rivers. They will not overwhelm you. You will not be scorched when you walk through the fire, and the flame will not burn you. And so that's how I'm getting through this time, is the promise of his presence. And it doesn't mean that we don't know what tomorrow brings. We don't know what Wednesday brings. We know that we're sure to have more fear. And I want PTSD patients out there to know that there is hope. You've got to have community. You got to get in counseling. And for those of us who believe in the star of the story, stay in church. What's getting you through it? The promise of his presence is getting me through it. What's getting you through it?
What's really been hitting home for me is hope. So I've been just scouring the Bible for verses that are hopeful, full of hope.
Full of hope. Hope.
And one of my favorites lately is Psalm 27:13. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And the end of...
Ooh, I got chills.
I know, I love that verse. And I also love the end of Psalm 23. Surely the goodness and faithfulness of the Lord will chase after me, will hunt me down all the days of my life. That's hopeful for me.
Yeah.
And so I'm finding verses that remind me that it won't always be like it is today. And there's hope.
Such hope. It reminds me in closing of a sermon that I heard by a young pastor, Stephen Rice, the other day. He heads up the Salt Company UF College Ministries in Gainesville, and he was talking about hope. And he was talking about how the only way we're going to make it through this season is through a relentless, stubborn hope. And Crissy, not everybody that listens to this podcast shares our faith, but I do want to share in closing what Stephen had to say. He was talking about how if you have never trusted Jesus as your Savior, he said, I got to be honest with you. I really don't know how you're going to find this hope. And so this hope that you're talking about, Crissy, even though those verses are for everybody, I remain confident of this thing that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. As you have said so many times on this podcast, we have to make the choice to chase after those things. And Stephen went on to say, and I would even go so far as to say that if you don't know Jesus as your Savior, I really don't know how you're going to find this hope. And so if that's you today and you want to know the star of the story, all of the ways to contact me are in the show notes. I am, as Annie F. Down says, embarrassingly easy to find all over social media, but I would love nothing more than to introduce you to the star of the story. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your time with us today. I am so grateful to Crissy Loughridge for agreeing to sit in on this podcast, and I am grateful for her perspective and, more than anything, her endearing friendship. Thank you to Amy Highland, who just continues to expertly produce these episodes. We have one more left, and that is with the one and only Cheryl Rice, who will lead us into Season 2 of Wednesdays with Watson. Until then, you guys take care and let the healing continue.